Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Safety First, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, hosted by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Lee with the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. Before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all of the panelists. There's an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in the public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. I encourage you to please ask questions about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box. We're gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentations, and we'll have a Q&A session where you will get responses in the last 10 to 15 minutes of tonight's event. You're also encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions and the answers when they are responded to. Finally, please note that the content presented tonight was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Now let's transition to our presentation for tonight. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker tonight, Matt Hayashi. Matt is an achievement-oriented manager with proven 14-plus year record of accomplishments in the pharmaceutical industry that includes experience in sales, U.S. international business development, logistics, purchasing, contract analysis, and investor relations. Matt is now the founder and CEO of Cannabis Clearwater, LLC, a full-service compliance company assisting the cannabis industry with permits, licensing, compliance, and revenue growth solutions for operators. Matt is certified by OSHA and has taught OSHA compliance for major universities, including Cal Poly Humboldt, Sonoma State, Santa Rosa Junior College, and many cannabis businesses in California, and has recently expanded to other states. I would now like to welcome Matt, and thank you, Matt, and please start your presentation for tonight.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you to the City of Los Angeles for giving me this opportunity. I would like to share my screen and show you what I have here. So before we begin, I am an outreach OSHA trainer for general industry for both federal and Cal OSHA. And my primary focus is OSHA training within the cannabis space. And as we go down the slides, you'll learn somewhat of the basic fundamentals of what is OSHA and why it pertains to everybody in the cannabis space. This applies to not only dispensaries, but this also applies to cultivators, nursery, laboratory, distribution and transportation, and manufacturing. So it falls under the scope of all ancillaries within the cannabis industry in the state of California. So here, we're going to go over a brief introduction of what is OSHA. I believe it is the only acronym in these slides, OSHA. And these 6 topics here will encompass everything for tonight. And like Frank said, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat and I will answer them accordingly and promptly. So for tonight, the purpose of this is to provide a business introduction information about OSHA from a cannabis perspective. The topics will include why is OSHA important to you in the cannabis space? What rights do you have under OSHA? And that applies to both employer and employee. Number 3, what responsibilities does your employer have under OSHA? So if you are a business owner, and this will apply to you. What are the OSHA standards? We will go over that. Number 5, how are OSHA inspections conducted? And we go into a brief detail of the different type of OSHA inspections that the inspectors are currently doing today in the cannabis space. And they are currently doing OSHA inspections in all ancillaries. And then finally, number 6, I will post in these slides some resources if you need additional help. Lots of wonderful resources, and they're all free. And I use them myself. So, okay. So why is OSHA important to you? Back, if you can remember, or for those who were around back in the 70s and early 80s, there was a thing, an attitude in construction and in general industry where people were fungible, meaning workers were, if they got hurt, they were either fired or they were reprimanded for taking a day off or getting hurt. And because of that, there was an act that was initiated, signed by Richard Nixon in 1970. Here, this just illustrates some of these reasons why OSHA is very important to you, particularly in the cannabis space, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. But here, 2013, over 4,405 workers were killed in 2013. Stat here is nearly 12 workers die every day. 797, close to 800 Hispanic or Latino workers were killed in 2013. 3 million serious workplace injuries and illnesses reported in 2012. And that falls under the Cal OSHA 30-hour general industry training requirement. Now, if you take a look over here, where my cursor is, OSHA makes a difference, and it did make a difference. And that's the whole point of this slide. Worker deaths are down on average from 38 deaths a day in 1970. Now that fell under general industry and construction. Imagine 38 deaths a day in 1970. After OSHA was implemented, we have come down to 12 deaths a day in 2013. Worker injuries and illnesses are down from 10.9 incidences per 100 workers in 1972, down to 3 per 100 in 2012. So OSHA has made an impact with respect to the general industry and construction. Now, we'll get into the difference here of what Cal OSHA and OSHA is, but this, bear in mind, is coming from a federal perspective, these stats and these numbers right here. In the state of California, we have what they call Cal OSHA, or California OSHA. And there's a couple of differences, but for the most part, they are similar, okay? So the history of OSHA. OSHA stands for, and I believe this is the only acronym in this presentation. OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It falls under the agency of the U.S. Department of Labor, okay? Responsibility to improve worker safety and health. Again, signed by Richard Nixon, December 29th, 1970. And the act was created, the act created OSHA, which formally became into being on April 28th, 1971. Okay, so that's a brief moment in time where people were seriously getting hurt, and the employees had no representation. It had no, no course of action, and because of that, here we have a wonderful act that helped save lives. And in the cannabis space, it's definitely going to save lives, regardless if you are in, like I said, dispensary or manufacturing, nursery. It all falls under this act, and we want this to continue. When I teach OSHA to a lot of my cannabis students, they get the idea that safety is important, but they don't understand some of the nuances that fall under the OSHA Act. And we'll touch base on some of these stuff as we go through it. So we have OSHA's mission to assure safe and healthful working conditions by setting and enforcing standards, and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance. Now, bear in mind, OSHA is a steward for the employees, okay? They are a steward for the employees, meaning that they help protect the employees from a hazard assessment perspective. They are there to help out the employees if they get hurt. They are there to help out the employers by doing these initial inspections. They developing job and safety and health standards and enforcing them through the work site inspections. That's very true. Providing training programs to increase knowledge about the occupational safety and health. Now, rights. Everyone has to understand in the cannabis space, the employer has certain rights. So does the employee. So for example, if you are running and own a dispensary, as an employer, you have to understand that you have to follow certain rules and regulations under OSHA. The same applies to the employee. They have certain rights to follow and uphold the spirit of OSHA. And by doing that, there's a confluence of safetiness and hazard awareness, which decreases the injury. Okay. So what rights do you have? From an employee perspective, you have a right to a safe and healthful workplace. Now, what does that mean? It means that the employee has a right to ask their boss to ask if it's safe. Is it a healthful workplace? In a lab setting, in a cannabis lab, and if it's not ISO 17025, there are certain chemicals, a lot of bases, a lot of acids that are being used. As an employee, that employee has the right to ask the owner, is this a safe place to work in a lab? And you have the right to do that without getting reprimanded. Happens all the time. You also have the right to know about hazardous chemicals. In manufacturing, most of the time when manufacturers are using a press, when the cultivators and nurseries are using a bucker or a twister, the terpenes and the oils gum up some of the blades, and it gets hard to it's hard to remove. So most of the time they use isopropyl to clean those blades, and you have a right to ask, hey, how contagious is this? What is it? Am I allergic to these chemicals? What is it? So you have a right to ask about that. You also have a right to report an injury to the employer. Okay. So if your finger gets cut through a twister, you have a right to report that injury to the employer, and the employer has a right to follow the rules and regs under OSHA's guidelines on filling out an accident report, and we'll get into that. You also have a right to complain or request hazard correction from an employer. The gist of the 30-hour training is for the people to become a safety manager. And when you become a safety manager in the cannabis space, you learn how to do corrective actions. And you also learn how to do root cause analysis. You also have the right to be trained. My personal feeling is training is super important. And I would recommend everyone to get trained and also get retrained. There are a lot of citations, not only in cannabis, but in generally speaking in general industry, which is everything but construction. A lot of companies get cited because they have not been doing their corrective actions, and they also have not been training or retraining their employees. And that's very important, because the more you train, the less of a chance of somebody getting hurt, okay? Less of a chance of somebody getting injured. And that also includes carpal tunnel, some ergonomic issues. So that falls under that as well. Other things, you have the right to hazard exposure and medical records. In the OSHA world, there's a list of chemicals where a person is allowed to use those chemicals within a certain amount of time. They are called short-term exposure limits or long-term exposure limits, and it is based on that specific chemical. Okay, you have a right to know that. The other things that you have a right to know from an employee perspective is how to file a complaint with OSHA. As an employee, they have the right to file a complaint without getting reprimanded to OSHA. You can be anonymous, or you can give them your personal information, and they will essentially write a report, and they will do their initial assessment at the facility. Okay. You have a right to participate in an OSHA inspection. Okay. So in the event that something does happen, you can contact OSHA, and they will inspect you. Well, not inspect you, I'm sorry, inspect the premise where you got hurt, and they will ask the owner of the company what happened. They will ask for reports. You have the right to pull that OSHA inspector aside and talk to them, saying, hey, I'm new to this cannabis manufacturing, and they wanted me to use this ladder. The ladder was broken, but my boss told me to use the ladder anyway. And I didn't think, I felt like I felt like I was going to get hurt, and I got reprimanded for not using that ladder. I just wanted to tell you that in privacy, just in case it's something that comes up. You have the right to do that. Employees have the right to do that, okay? Be free from retaliation and for exercising safety and health rights. So let's put this to real world, let's apply to this. If you run a dispensary, okay? And you own the dispensary, and at the end of the day, you have your cleaning procedures, and he or she is telling the employee, hey, use that mop. We have bleach in the cleaning room. I want you to pour bleach into, the bucket, and then pour some water in the bucket, and then go mop the floor. At the end of the day, these are your rules, or this is your, what you have to do, okay? So if you communicate to the employer that you are allergic to bleach, it is the employer's responsibility to find a bleach alternative. Now, if the employer doesn't do that, and you as an employee you say, hey, I am allergic to bleach, and the employer gets upset, they get mad, they say, I don't care, I want you to use the bleach and I want you to mop the floor because we have tons of people coming in tomorrow morning and time is of the essence. If you don't do it, you will get fired. As an employee, you have the right to contact OSHA and file a complaint for that very reason. You have to remember, OSHA is steward. They're steward for the employees, okay? That's what they do. And it's very important, especially in the cannabis space, because I get it. All of you in the cannabis space, and I've done a lot of trainings. I've done a lot of OSHA trainings in the cannabis space, from south of San Diego, San Isidro, all the way up to Crescent City. There's the one thing that I get. It doesn't matter if you're a lab or a manufacturing or dispensary. The one thing that always comes to mind is safety. And safety is the #1 concern. It doesn't matter if you're a lab. It doesn't matter if you're a manufacturing. Like I said, safety is the #1 concern. And OSHA takes that at that level because they understand that this is a new industry, especially in California. We know that cannabis is not going away. And we know from an OSHA perspective that you as a business owner have an opportunity to rise and shine by helping out your employees. And what they hope that you do is practice occupational safety, hazard, and awareness. That's it. That's really it. If you do that, a few things will happen. And as this has been proven, if you practice safety to your employees, and I have the data to show this, if you practice safety to your employees in the cannabis space, you get a higher morale. And what does that mean? Higher morale means a bigger output. So your investment to safety will have a 4 to 6x return. For every dollar spent, and I'm not making this up, this is a real statistic, for every dollar spent in safety under cannabis, you get a $4 to $6 return. Not only that, you will get a less turnover. Nowadays, here we are in 2023, a lot of companies, from small businesses to your billion-dollar companies, place safety just as important as profitability. What I mean is, when companies get together and they do their budgeting meeting, they do a quarterly budget meeting or their annual. Companies like Facebook, Google, Oracle, Sutter Health, Kaiser, Johnson & Johnson, when they all get together, they budget out a lot of time in safety, because safety is just as important as profitability. Yeah, they want to make money. I get it. I want all of you to succeed. I want all of you to make a lot of money, but they also want you to succeed by being proactive in safetiness. Okay. So safety and health workplace, safe and healthful workplaces. This is the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. Employers must provide workplaces that are free of known dangers that could harm their employees, and that the laws give workers rights to participate in activities to ensure protection from job hazards. Okay, this also applies to cannabis as well. Part of which is this, your SDSs. This is your safety data sheet. Okay, hazardous chemicals. We will talk about it. I generally teach when I do my 30-hour. I talk about PPE and other safety data sheets and hazard awareness, hazard assessments. But first and foremost, you must understand what these things are for. Safety data sheets are a list of chemical safety data sheets. It's a globally harmonized system. It falls under that, so that if you want to order a certain chemical from Germany and you receive it in, Oxnard, then the same safety data sheet will be the same. It has the same format. Okay. So container labeling, talk about that, super important. And then physical and health hazards of chemicals and protection measures. Okay. Information on injuries and illnesses. You have your record keeping rule. Super important. I talk about this a lot and I train people to do this. You must learn to understand that OSHA is a federal organization. Cal OSHA falls under Fed, but Cal OSHA has its own entity. And because of that, you must understand how to fill out these logs. Record keeping rule applies to the 300 log, the 300A, and the 301. These are injury logs, and you must understand how to fill that out. If you do not know how to fill that out, and if you incorrectly fill that out, you will get a citation, 100%, I guarantee it. So you have to understand how to fill out some of these logs, okay? Workers may report safety and health concerns without fear of discharge or discrimination. We kind of talked about that in the other couple slides back. But yeah, workers have a right to report safety and health concerns. My boss wants me to use a defective chainsaw. Right? There's no guard on the chainsaw. It's the only chainsaw they have, and my boss wants me to use it. If I don't use that chainsaw, I will get fired. Okay. You as an employee have a right to contact OSHA. Okay. OSHA rules protect workers who raise concerns to their employer or OSHA about unsafe and unhealthful working conditions in the workplace. Winter, right? If it's raining, do they have mats? Number one accident in general industry are slip and falls. It happens all the time. You also have the right to ask for training. Okay. Right to training, healthful and safety hazards, standards, including chemical hazards, equipment, noise for you cultivators and nursery. I think noise is going to be a huge issue, right? As well as confined spaces. So you have a right to be retrained. Okay. You have a right to examine medical and exposure records. Okay. Are there harmful exposures like dust and any kind of biologics out there floating around that may cause some kind of respiratory issue? You have the right to ask for that type of stuff. Okay. Physical stress, noise, heat illnesses. You have a right to examine those things. Okay. And then finally, you have a right to file a complaint. Okay. You have a right to file a complaint with OSHA, anonymous or anonymous. Either way, it's all confidential. Okay. Employee representative can accompany OSHA inspections. So there are different types of inspections. The worker does have the right to talk to an inspector privately. They can pull that person inside and say, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And you could do that, okay? Workers can find out about inspection results, abatement measures, and may object to dates set for violations to be corrected, okay? You have a right to do that. Workers have the right to be free from retaliation for exercising safety and health rights. You also have the right from retaliation from seeking safety and health on the job without fear of punishment, meaning you don't have to worry about your job. You will not get fired. You should not get fired for putting your safety as a priority, okay? Workers have 30 days to contact OSHA if they feel they've been punished for exercising their safety and health rights, all right? That's what that is. You have 30 days. Now, employers, for those of you who run a distro, who own a lab, who own a dispensary, who own cultivation or nursery or manufacturing, transportation, all of you business owners have certain responsibilities under Osha. Okay, and these are them. And it's important for you to understand that, you know, as a business owner, they want you to practice safety and hazard awareness, because one of which is it's required. You have to take these OSHA trainings in the 30 hours, but they want you, because the cannabis industry is fairly new, they're kind of giving you a little bit of leeway, a little bit of latitude on certain things. So they are putting their best foot forward and hoping that you do the best. Okay. In other words, what I mean is you are under a standard that is already qualified by other industries in the same standard. So what I mean is, if you're a baker and you own a bakery, you have to maintain the same standards as a person who owns and runs a textile. It's the same standard. As a person who runs Facebook or Amazon, they have the same standard. It's way up here. Cannabis is down here because it's a new industry. But within time, they want you to practice these standards and you will get up to here with everybody else. So think about it as they're not picking on you. And I tell this to my students all the time. They're not really picking on you. They're not doing this because you're in the cannabis space. They're doing this because they want you to meet the same standards as everybody else. So I hope that makes sense. They're not picking on you. They just want you to be up with everybody else. They want you to be the same. Okay. That's the reason why. So employee responsibilities here: provide a workplace free from recognized hazards, comply with OSHA standards, provide training required by OSHA standards here, record keeping, medical exams when required by OSHA, access to workers' exposures and medical records, no discrimination whatsoever. Post OSHA citations and hazard correction notices, and provide and pay for most PPE. That's a law. That's an OSHA thing. You have to pay for the PPE. So if you are a grower or a nursery and during the harvest time and you hire, you third party, most of you third party out your trimmers, you have to provide the PPE for them. They cannot pay for it themselves. You have to provide, right? So gloves, whatever else, goggles, hairnets, Kevlar suits, whatever that you do during trimming, during the trimming time, and they get tired. I know you guys, they really do get tired. You're responsible to financially provide that stuff for them, especially with the ergonomics as well. Other stuff that employer responsibilities, you must report a worker death to OSHA, report each worker-related hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. Get into that in a second. Maintain injury and illness records, that's your 300 stuff. Inform worker how to report an injury or illness to the employer. Make records available to workers. Allow OSHA access to records. Post annual summary of injuries and illnesses. Going back to this work-related hospitalization. So here's the thing. I ask this all the time. If you run a dispensary, it really doesn't matter if you run a dispensary, manufacturing, cultivation, nursery. Do you ask your employees if they are allergic to the terpenes? Are they allergic to any kind of cannabinoid? Do they have any adverse effects? Do they get some kind of contact skin dermatitis? If they do, and if they have to go to hospital, you have to fill out an injury log, okay? You have to record that act, okay? So work-related hospitalization, if the simple rule is if it goes beyond first aid, and if somebody gets hurt and it goes beyond first aid, you have to record it and you have to report that. If it doesn't, then you're fine. So I always use the splinter analogy. If you get a splinter and somebody gets a first aid kit and they have the tweezers, they take the splinter out of the worker's finger, you may put a Band-Aid around that. Does that qualify to go to the hospital? And generally speaking, no, right? Depending on the size of the splinter. but we're talking like a real tiny one. You know, they generally do not have to go to the hospital. On the other side, though, if someone in manufacturing is using like a press and oils are coming out and their fingers get caught on a cold press and they damage their bones and they break their bones and there's compound fractures and whatnot in their fingers, yeah, you have to report that because they have to go to the hospital. So generally speaking, if it goes beyond first aid, you have to report it. Okay. All right, so why are you here? Why am I rambling on? How does this pertain to you, right? I am a dispenser owner. Why does this apply to me? Okay. I run a lab. I'm ISO 17025. I've been in the lab business for 20 plus years. I know every single rule, SDS. Why do I have to take this OSHA training? Well, the reason is the law states it. Okay. So under California Department of Industrial Relations, here in accordance with the California Businesses and Professions Code, employers with 2 or more employees must ensure 1 supervisor and 1 employee have successfully completed a Cal OSHA 30-hour general industry outreach training course offered by a training provider that is authorized by an OSHA Training Institute, OTI, Education Center. So I do these all the time. And the reason that we want this to happen, we want to be in the spirit of safety. So it makes sense that the state is ensuring 1 supervisor and 1 employee has taken the Cal OSHA, because the gist is the supervisor is going to be ultimately responsible because they are going to be like a safety manager on the premise. And it doesn't matter if you're a distro, you know, or a grower, or even a dispensary person. They will want, the state will want to have a safety manager on site all the time. But they know that the safety manager is going to be inundated with a lot of paperwork. So they have an employee who is on the floor, kind of like a floor supervisor for trimming, a trimmer supervisor. That person will understand the rules and regs of Cal OSHA, and that's why they want you to do that. So minimum of 2. If you don't have 2, if you are an employee of 1, then you do not qualify of taking the Cal OSHA 30-hour, okay? 4 groups of OSHA standards. Cannabis falls under general industry. It does not fall under agriculture. It does not fall under construction or maritime, okay? There are only 4 standards in OSHA, and general industry is the one that encompasses cannabis, okay? Now you have your OSHA standards. Limits workers' exposures to hazardous chemicals, substances, or noises, noise pollution, require the use of certain safe work practices and equipment. I'm gonna talk about noise really fast. If you own a nursery, or if you own a cultivation, and I get it, you have a 10,000 or you have a 1 acre, and you have the drying rooms. I'm gonna, you know, I'll get honest here. I predict there's going to be a lot of hearing issues for people who are not giving your employees the proper hearing protection, because the state requires anybody in the cannabis space that has a noise level of 85 decibels or higher, you must require hearing protection for your employees. And I know a lot of a lot of nursery and cultivators don't do that. So this is kind of like a fair warning for you who run a cultivation site or a nursery site. 85 decibels or higher. What is 85 decibels? It's a loud fan. It's a loud 16-inch fan. You have them. I get it. You guys have them. But most of the time, you just don't have 1. Some of you have like 20, and some of you have like 50, right? And they're all running at the same time. And during the harvest time, when you're going in and out and you're changing and you're doing the whole mother thing and you're cloning and you're moving the, you're transporting the plants from one room to the other, and an employee is in a room where it's 85 decibels or higher and you are not providing hearing protection, they're going to have hearing damage, and it falls on the owner. Okay. So when in doubt, if it's 85 decibels or higher, and there are apps, I can show you these apps where it will record the noise. If it's more than 85, you must provide hearing protection. Okay. Going down here, require employers to monitor certain hazards and keep records of workplace injuries and illnesses. Okay. Monitor that stuff. Okay. This is part of your OSHA standards. Now, again, they're not picking on you. What they're doing is they are training you to these standards, because you would have to do this if you were a baker. You would have to do this if you're in textiles. You would in construction as well. So they're not just picking on you because you're in the cannabis industry. They're doing this because it's the standard for everybody. All right. Cal OSHA has a standard. These are the standards that you have to abide to. How are OSHA inspections conducted? Okay. OSHA compliant safety and health officers may conduct workplace inspections at reasonable times. I get calls, text messages, emails all the time saying, I got a notice from an OSHA officer and they're going to do an inspection at my facility on such and such date. Can you help me? Meaning, hey, can you take a look at my place before the OSHA officer comes in? And I want to make sure that we're spick and span and we're clear. Okay. So that's what that is. OSHA inspectors can come announced. Most of the time they don't. OSHA inspectors do unannounced inspections, and they just check things off the list. They have a list. They want to see your programs. They want to see your IIPP and all of these other, your fire emergency action protocols. Do you have an escape route protocol? What's your PPE compliance? Do you have a hazard awareness protocol? Do you have a confined space program? They have all of these programs. They'll ask you, do you have these? And you normally get them when you take the 30-hour. But yeah, 100%. They are going to ask you all of this stuff. Without advance notice, except in rare circumstances, right? Imminent danger if somebody died. In fact, anyone who tells an employer about an OSHA inspection in advance receives fines and a jail term. Okay. So here they do their, without advance notice. Okay. They are doing it right now. And they are, I'll tell you this, OSHA inspectors, they don't, I guess now is a good time to talk about this. OSHA, they're inspectors, right? They're stewards for the employees. So they're not there like with a badge and they're like bad cop, good cop. No, they generally are really good people and they want to protect everybody. So they are, stewards for the employees. They believe in protection. They believe in hazard awareness, and they will go about doing their day, right? They're not going to yell at you. They're not going to scream at you. They're just going to make a note, and they will want you to do these certain things. Straighten up that clean room. Make sure you label all of your chemicals. They're going to jot down certain things, and you are going to be responsible to do these things and show them that you did these things that they asked you to do. My advice is do it immediately. Like, don't do it tomorrow. Don't do it the following week. Do it while they are there. Because what that says is, it says, hey, this person's taking our suggestions very serious and they're getting it done now. They love that. Okay. Be proactive about that stuff. So you have your different types of OSHA inspections. Imminent danger. Okay. different types of other OSHA inspections, fatality or hospitalizations, worker complaints and referrals. Okay. So if a worker files a complaint and an OSHA inspector says, hey, we got a complaint, we're here to take a look at a certain thing, they have the right to do that. Okay. Other types of OSHA inspections are targeted inspections, meaning we'll use like a ladder, a super easy ladder example. In the manufacturing world, I'm willing to bet you have a ladder. You definitely have a ladder in cultivation. Let's talk about manufacturing for a second. So let's say you have a ladder in manufacturing and somebody used a ladder and they fell off the ladder. Okay. They broke their leg and they fell off the ladder. They had to go to the doctors. The doctors coded it, you know, workers' comp, going, you know, all of that stuff. But OSHA gets a glimpse. Hey, we're here. We heard that one of your employees fell off the ladder and broke their leg. Can you take me to that area where that person broke their leg? Okay. And they will inspect that targeted area and take notes. Okay. They'll take notes. That's what they do. Now, these different programs, local emphasis programs, national emphasis, they're all part of the OSHA inspection itself. Okay. All of these kind of encapsulate the body of OSHA inspections. When you have a targeted inspection, they normally do what they call a follow-up inspection. And it makes sense, right? So if you own a dispensary and someone passes out because they had bleach, you know, someone inhaled bleach and they had an allergic reaction and they passed out, OSHA's gonna knock on your door and go, can you take me to the area where your employee passed out because they opened up the container of bleach, right? They'll do that. Then they'll make a recommendation. Please put the bleach on the other side and, you know, and then they'll come back. They'll do a follow-up, so. You have your penalties here, your willful, serious, other than serious, and repeated violations. Okay, for all different types of citations. And then you have your sources, right? Your sources with worksite, employer, supervisor, SDSs, other sources, your training. It all applies to compliance, your NIOSH. Okay. And then you could file a complaint on a website. If you go to OSHA, if you Google OSHA, you can file a complaint. Okay. So here is a summary of what I had talked about here, and the importance of OSHA, the history of OSHA, why you have to do it, OSHA standards, OSHA inspections. Now, bear in mind, again, it still falls under cannabis. Okay. And again, here, these are your, you know, the advents of Cal OSHA, you know, carry out intent of federal act, compensation to 50%. Fed OSHA monitors the state program. Cal OSHA has a jurisdiction of only California, not outside of California. And probably one of the most important slides, if you have any issues, do not hesitate to call OSHA for advice. They will not yell at you. I call them all the time. I do it during my training. I call them all the time. It's free. It's free advice, and you're getting it from the source. So if you have any questions, give them a call, okay? You can email them, you can call them. There's tons of, San Diego is the headquarters of Cal OSHA. So if you're near there, if you're near down San Diego County, you can stop by. You have a thing called eTools, free videos, free publications, right? And they also have their partnership programs here, the Golden Gate Alliances, okay? And other resources here, your community recognition, reduction in injuries and illnesses, okay? And that's it. You know, it's a lot of information to digest. Again, they want you to practice. They are the stewards for safety. They are stewards for the employees, and they want you to practice safety and health in the cannabis space. So.
Thank you, Matt. A lot of good information. Before you take your slides down, can you just go back, just summarize real quickly the citations and penalties? I mean, I just wanted to make sure we didn't gloss over that too much? Because I mean, it's pretty significant in some cases, so.
Yeah, so here you have your citations and penalties. There are 4 different types of violations. You have your willful, your serious, your other than serious, and repeated violations. Now, the penalties are for a willful act, $70,000 for each willful violation, with a minimum penalty of $5,000 for each willful violation. Meaning a company had intent to harm an employee, okay? $70,000 for each violation. You have your serious, it's a violation that is lower than willful, and the violations are $7,000, up to $7,000. Your other than serious, penalty up to $7,000, and then the big one, repeated violation, is again penalties up to $70,000 for each repeated violation. Okay, very important stuff.
Yeah, and the repeated could even be for an other than serious or a serious, right?
That is correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it gets pretty steep, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So more of the emphasis of why health and safety is as important as profitability, right? When you said it earlier, this is
Exactly.
that comes right out of your bottom line, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great information. Let's go to a couple of the questions. One that came in earlier, and I'll ask this one first, is what are the top 5 violations that have been issued by Cal OSHA for cannabis businesses?
Really, really great question. The trends is this not having any record keeping rules, not training your employees, making sure that, especially in general industry and in cannabis, you have your IIPP, all of your documentation is in line. Let's see what other ones. Safety. There's probably the top. Those are probably the top 5. Fire, emergency action plans, IIPP, record keeping rule, training. I think those are them. I believe those are the top 5.
Okay, and just clarify IIPP. Just it's a fancy acronym there.
We really didn't discuss it.
Yeah.
IIPP is an acronym for I'm looking it up here. So yeah, California Injury and Illness Prevention Program. It is required within the state of California. It is a program. It's about 50 pages that has all of the listed requirements in the cannabis space that pertains to safety.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a question came in. This is a pretty interesting one, but obviously it comes in with some relevance to a real situation. You may or may not be answered, but let's ask it because I think it's pretty interesting. The DCC requires cannabis waste to be rendered unrecognizable and unusable. I mean, we know a lot about that, but has not provided guidance as to how that can be done in an OSHA compliant manner. If a cannabis company makes an employee improperly render vape pens or batteries, such as with a hammer, real story it says, does that open up the company and possibly a DCC to OSHA violations?
The short answer is yes, because the employer is fully responsible for the safetiness of the employee. So if you use that example, if the employee starts using a hammer and disposes those vapors or the vapes, and somebody gets hurt, like they smash their hand, then the onus falls on the employer.
Yeah, so that mean that'd be the most effective way to render those unrecognizable, unusable, to send the employee out there with a hammer, kind of thing, right? So
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
or at least you take on the risk, or you increase your risk. Great. Okay. Another question from the audience. How do I? There's a lot to digest here, but how do I stay on top of what is required from Cal OSHA in terms of regulations that I must follow?
If you go to the website, if you Google Cal OSHA, is it Cal OSHA?
Yeah, DIR. Yeah, I think.
DIR. They have the most current rules and regs that fall under the cannabis program.
Okay, I think that was in your slide. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, but obviously, you need to, you know, the entrepreneur or the designee has to stay on top of those things, right? To be aware. Right?
Yeah, and so that's part of the reasons why the state of California is enforcing people to take the 30-hour trainings, because they are essentially a safety manager.
Yep.
And it's general industry and construction. They take them because they want to do the risk analysis and they want to do the safety programs for every company.
Right.
So
yeah, and I assume that through that, when you go through the 30-hour, you'll get all the knowledge about who to call, who to ask, where to go, how to stay on top of everything, so on and so forth.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I know this has come up, many times, but do I have to hire someone to manage the health and safety aspects of my operation?
No, you don't. No. If you fall within the spirit of OSHA and you follow the hazard awareness, I'm just strictly talking cannabis. And if you follow your SOPs and the IIPP, you are within the spirit of OSHA. You don't have to hire, a third-party consultant to do that type of stuff. You may want to do that when you get an inspection, or you may want to do that as a quarterly basis. I recommend that to all of my clients on a quarterly basis. That's what we do. We do audits, if you will, quarterly audits at a distro or manufacturing, and we pretend to be an OSHA inspector, and we just go down this list. We have like a 200 list. We check things off, and that's a good way to practice your checks and balances.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Before it gets to the point where it could be, consequences that are financial, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, kind of a build on from that, build on question. So if I decide to manage the health and safety myself, do I have to have some kind of professional experience or professional designation to do that?
You must take the 30-hour Cal OSHA training, the outreach training.
And that's really all that would be required?
From an OSHA perspective, yeah. The OSHA, when you receive your Cal OSHA card, there is no expiration date. So you could take the training once and then you're done. And it falls within the jurisdiction of California. So once you get that card, and let's say you want to get out of the cannabis industry, but you want to go into automotive, that card goes with you wherever you go, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So there's some value there, right? To, for sure. Yeah. Or you go into another vertical, right? Or expand to another vertical.
Yep.
You've already been through the 30-hour. You don't have to take it just because you switched verticals, right? Or
Exactly.
got a second or third license, which is good. That's great.
Yep.
And then I know you hit on this, but just maybe summarize. If I'm a cultivator and not in retail, do I also have to follow all the regulations?
Yes, you do. Everybody. As a cultivator, you do. Nursery, you do.
Yeah. So they'd obviously just be, different protocols and different procedures and different approaches, right? Just, each manufacturing lab they're so uniquely different, right? In operation, right?
Yeah. So I was doing a training in July, and I got a lot of people from LA, and a lot of them were dispensary. But then I got a few people from Palm Desert who are growers. Now, even though the two ancillaries are different, the rules and regs are the same, but you're not going to have water lines at a dispensary and hoses and all this stuff at a dispensary, right? And at the same time, you're not going to have customers at your grow to shop for product. That's not going to make, that just doesn't make sense. So whatever ancillary that you are in, you have to do your best judgment as to what works for you. In other words, can you foresee somebody getting hurt? And if you do, then you have to change up. Then you have to change.
Great clarification. And let's end on this. Kind of the tell-all question, right? Can Cal OSHA shut a business down or shut my business down?
The short answer is no. Now, they have ways to go about it. Cal OSHA does not have the power to shut you down. If you run a dispensary tonight, and if Cal OSHA officer knocked on your door and said, we're shutting you down, they cannot do that. Now, how they go about that is they are close to the courts. And what that means is they get the order from the judge within the county to shut that company down. So the judge writes the court order to shut that business down, and OSHA brings that order to that business. So,
Right.
but they do not have the power. It's not in their mission to shut it down.
Great. Well, let's hope none of us get to the point where we feel like we've done something that you would think could get you shut down. So I think that's great. Matt, thank you very much. Your knowledge and depth, and I appreciate I think we all appreciate the examples and the sharing of different scenarios. It really kind of brings it home, right? So really appreciate using those scenarios and helping to share this information. So thank you, Matt, for sharing your knowledge tonight, and thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's website, cannabis.lacity.org. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. See you at the next webinar. Thank you.